Hi, everyone. Welcome to the virtual program Native Garden Design Panel Discussion, presented as part of the Partners for Native Landscaping series. My name is Rebecca Clark, and I'm the Manager of Adult Services at St. Louis County Library. I'd like to share some brief information before we begin. We are live right now, and this program is being recorded. This is a webinar, so we cannot see or hear you, but you're certainly welcome to submit questions and comments in the chat box. They'll be addressed at the end as time allows. Also, this program is being captioned. To show those captions, you can click that CC button on your Zoom panel near the chat box. Stay tuned for more great programs from St. Louis County Library, including several more Partners for Native Landscaping series programs. For instance, you can now register for 4 other events taking place this month and during April, including programs about controlling pests, transforming vacant lots into green spaces, pollinators, and dealing with deer. I'll put a link in the chat box to register. We do have a sign-in sheet and a survey for this program. Thank you so much for filling them out before you leave. Again, I'll add that to the chat box. Now, I'm happy to introduce one of today's presenters, Jean Ponzi, the Green Resources Specialist at Earthways Center of Missouri Botanical Garden. Jean will introduce every other panelist that's here with us this afternoon. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Jean. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Rebecca. Welcome, everybody, to the Garden Design Panel, part of Partners for Native Landscaping's Spring Series. You hopefully saw scrolling on your screen while you were waiting for the webinar to start, some other webinars that we're offering. We're actually offering them through some of the rest of the months of the year. They've typically been all in the spring the last couple of years. They will all be recorded, and you can find, in addition to on the library's website, find these recordings and information about our in-person events at partnersfornativelandscaping.org. We have 3 remarkable professionals with a wide range of experience with us today. I'm going to ask you to type your questions in the chat when you think of them. Some of those questions will be able to answer as the program goes on, but we're going to hold questions for our panelists and their responses to your questions until the end of the program. So you don't have to remember until the end. Our first panelist is Susie van der Riet. Susie's enterprise, St. Louis Native Plants, has been working around St. Louis since 2009. She served on the education subcommittee of Grow Native, which in my humble opinion is the best native plant program in the U.S. She has been a habitat advisor for St. Louis Audubon Society's Bring Conservation Home. Audubon is one of our partners for native landscaping, and her yard is platinum certified in Bring Conservation Home. So garden design perspective from Susie van der Riet. Susie, welcome.
Thank you, Jean. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Welcome, everybody. Even though I can't see you out there, I am pretty excited to be able to talk about native garden design and lovely photos of flowers and insects and everything on such a blustery day here in St. Louis. I'm going to jump right in. So native garden design, this is something that I always like to compare to, hang on, it's not moving forward. There we go. I always like to compare the process of coming up with or creating a design to something like witnessing a symphony. And for anybody who's ever been to Powell Hall to witness our awesome St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, you can understand that we have all of these different instruments that are playing together in an organized fashion to create one or culminate in one sort of sound together. And this is very similar to planning and managing a native garden in that the same things that go into that. We have lots of different pieces. We have different elements. Oops, man, got a little trigger happy there. We have different pieces and elements that we can bring together in a very purposeful way to create a garden that's aesthetically pleasing to us, that works with our environment instead of against it, and is very supportive of our local wildlife, including the little guys like insects and arthropods. So what does that look like? What are these pieces that we're looking at? And I'm just going to touch on some. So color and texture is a really big one, or big two, I should say. Contrasting colors, textures, groupings of plants, which may bloom at different times during the growing season, or they might even bloom at the same time and complement each other. And so you can actually see some different examples of that here on the slide. We have things that, like Jacob's ladder, little purple guys here in the back, and groundsel, which both bloom in the springtime. So they both favor similar environments to each other in the shade. And so they can be a really nice pair together. Purple love grass with some allium. These alliums are just kind of peeking up and blooming above the grass tufts, the purple love grass, because they're approximately the same height and kind of active at the same time. We have alum root with some, which is really leafy, like broadleaf, with iris kind of back here, a little more, fine leaved, and then soft rush back here as well. So those are kind of contrasting textures. We have goldenrod and aster, which I think are just the best pair out there. They both bloom late summer and into fall, and so they're an awesome kind of companion planting. And black gum and redbud, just fall color cannot be neglected, and so when fall color is abounding with our trees, we can pair those things nicely. And we have some closed gentian and Texas green eyes up here on the right hand side, and so again, just really nice pairing of those different things. They complement each other really well. So they're nice combos, but we want to make sure that when we're pairing these different things, that they are things that and plants that will thrive in similar site conditions as well. Okay, so a little more emphasis, talking about color and texture a bit more. We got a few slides. So just focusing on different seasons. So when we have spring kind of, folding into summer, we have some lovely spring blooming plants that we can incorporate, such as, you can see the different ones on here. We've got pussy toes, which is an awesome ground cover, blooms in the spring. Shining blue star, also a spring bloomer, a little bit bigger. Blue wild indigo, which is going to be spring into summer. We've got purple love grass, which is kind of this nice texture that we can pair with leafy plants or flowering plants. We can combine those things so that they have that nice contrast and different textures and colors. And then we've got robin's plantain, a sweet little ground cover, very leafy thing that blooms in the springtime and attracts lots of different little pollinators that are emerging in the springtime. And then more summery type blooms with our butterfly milkweed and purple cone flower, pollinator pleasers for sure. And just, really lovely plants for summertime. Okay. Summer into fall, we've got our Rudbeckia species, which we have a number of those. Oftentimes people refer to those as black-eyed Susans, but there are a lot of species of that genus, Rudbeckia. Partridge pea, awesome summer bloomer as well. Purple love grass, this is kind of what it starts to do as we get summer going into fall. It starts to go dormant, turns a little purpley or maroon, starts to look very much like a low-lying layer of smoke towards the ground. Just makes you want to kind of rub your hands through it. It's just a really nice texture, short grass. And then we have our asters, of course. We have a lot of different asters to choose from. We have a lot of different goldenrods to choose from. So we get our, late summer into fall, sometimes really late into the fall with some of these bloomers. Marsh milkweed with this lovely little great black wasp. We have blooming in the summertime, later in the summer, and then we've got prairie dock, another one that's an awesome summertime bloomer, and also appeals to a lot of our bees that are active later in the season as well. I keep trying to use my arrow to scroll. I'm sorry, that's the delay. I'm trying to do that and it doesn't work. Okay, so, and then fall and winter, we can't neglect these as potential times for color and texture to be highlighted. So we've got our hickories, shagbark hickory putting out this lovely fall color. We've got our frost flower with our native dittany. Ozark witch hazel blooming, basically mine started in January, still going strong. Awesome, fragrance as well, fun to watch. Observe these petals curl in on themselves in really inclement winter days. Little blue stem, another great texture grass with these lovely eyelash seed heads here. The color of 9-bark, fall color of 9-bark is amazing. And then even our oak trees, which I think sometimes oaks are a little neglected when we talk about fall color, but they can have some really awesome fall color too. And Indian physic here at the bottom, lovely perennial for the fall. Okay, and again, here we go. So what else can we include? Well, if another objective for your garden composition is to attract and support specific wildlife, we do need flowering plants to support them, but this is really only one part of a complete habitat. So what else do we need to consider for complete habitat? Well, what goes into a complete habitat is same thing for us: food, space, shelter. At the very bottom, actually, also, which I have highlighted as much as I can, poison-free environment is very, very important for all of us too. So we have, I've already talked about some different blooms, different flowers that we can use. We really want to make sure that we're not just taking one type of flowering plant and just plunking it there by itself. We want plants, flowering plants, to be contiguous. We want them to be touching and in larger groups, plant clusters, for insects to have an easier time feeding on them, and for arthropods and birds also to have an easier time feeding on the bugs that are on those plants as well, for any of the fruit that might be in there, any of the seed. This is going to be a better hunting ground for all of the above. This also is going to make things more aesthetically pleasing for us. So this is where we overlap with what is appealing to wildlife. Usually things are going to look more formal or more aesthetically pleasing for us when we have larger groupings of plants, maybe 1 or 2 species at a time. Particular plants for birds, including anything that produces, fruit that might be, or seeds or nuts that might be appetizing to them. And then host plants for bugs. So if we're wanting to attract particular things, for example, you can see over in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got this pussy toe plant that has the American painted lady caterpillar feeding on it. So that is a host plant. And so that relationship that we see between things like monarch butterfly caterpillars and milkweed applies to a lot of plants in our plant palette and our wildlife as well. They have those close relationships with each other. Bare ground for insects that nest in the ground. So 70% of our bee species actually nest in the ground. You can see that up here up top, this little bee peeking out of this little burrow. So when we do things like cover up our ground with weed barrier, when we put 4 or 5 inches of mulch down, it makes it really hard for these things to nest in the ground. So we can have those areas planted with ground cover, and that's fine. But when we just kind of have to be careful to keep some room. If we have a lot of mulch other places, maybe we just have some small places that are small patches of ground that are allocated specifically for those nesting insects. Bunch grasses, awesome shelter, hunting ground for birds, nesting materials for birds. I usually see firefly beetles crawling up out of things like the side oats grandma each year. They just hang out in there during the daytime. I see a lot of praying mantises in there. There's just a lot of activity, and also a number of our grasses are also host plants to different Lepidoptera or moth and butterfly species. Rotting wood, branches, brush piles, those are going to be great hunting grounds for birds again, but these are where things nest as well. So 30% of our bee species are going to nest in things like hollowed out rotting wood or hollowed out stems. Like here, you can actually see somebody has inhabited this empty pith here, this hollowed out pith of the stem. Leaving the leaves where you can. This means, and everybody's got their threshold for this, I realize. You can see this bumblebee who actually is, that she's a foundress. She is sheltering sort of her head anyway, and some leaf debris here. And so leaving the leaves where we can. There's so many living things in leaves. I don't want to go, too much into the weeds with this, but it's really important to leave the leaves. Relocate them somewhere, like I've got an area where there's just some shrubs. I don't have much else planted back here, so nothing's going to get, crowded out by the leaves or smothered by the leaves. And I just pile all my leaves back in this area here. So we can do things creatively. Some is better than none. And so whatever you can do with that is pretty ideal. It's good to include a space in a design for something like that if need be. Including a water feature, a bird bath. Also, this is something that can be included, is very important for birds. In poison-free environment, I touched on that, mosquito sprays and things like, grub killers that are applied in lawn treatments, different things like that are going to work against you. And so we want to be really careful and informed about what it is that we're applying in our outdoor environment, because that could very much be undoing everything, all of our good efforts that we're putting forth to support these things. Something that I think is really helpful for people to do first is to come up with a site analysis and plan, to come up with your, a list of your ideals for your garden space, measurements, because what kind of space are you needing to fill here? And then any sort of site information, how you want the space to function, what kind of site conditions you have. Is it wet, dry? Does it hold water? Does it drain really quickly? Is it a slope, sunny, shady, all that kind of stuff? You want to have that information. And definitely incorporating how you want to use the space. If you're going to be gathering, if you need a fire pit area, dining area, any of that kind of stuff is important to include. And then come up with your big dream. You can come up with something that's as extravagant or not as this. You could just do a small little bit of, this corner. You could, if you just have a small walkway, walk through area next to your house, you could certainly do something like this. And this is, this also, if you do have something that you come up on this kind of grand scale, you can implement this in increments. It does not have to be something that is all done at once. In fact, I would advise not to, maybe, unless you have somebody maintaining it for you. Okay, I'm wrapping up here, I promise. So once we get through all of that, then I just wanted to kind of highlight some different principles that you can see demonstrated in this little patch here. So this is actually a little snippet that was taken from the design on the prior page. You have a nice little walkway through here. You have a repetition of different leafy green plants like wild ginger. We have Jacob's ladder, repetition of clusters of that. We have clusters of sedges, semi-evergreen plant. So that's going to hold us green through the wintertime. We have Indian pink. These all bloom, they might overlap a little bit, have slightly different bloom periods. And then there is some Dittany on the end here, which is more your late summer and then fall bloomer. So you have kind of a combination of different plants. You have the principle of repetition of clusters of plants. So it's going to give you a little bit more of an organized, formal appearance. And you have a space carved out for humans to use this. So all very important things. We want to make this usable for us as well so that we can go in, we can enjoy it, we can walk through it. We want to make sure that we're choosing size appropriate or site appropriate plants. So these all can thrive with a fair amount of shade, actually a lot of shade, pretty dry conditions, most of them. And nobody's going to walk through this and feel like a plant's eating their face, because these plants are all very short plants in stature. The tallest one in here is Indian pink, and it's not going to get taller. It'll cap out no more than 2 feet in height. And so you have a situation where it'll be hopefully really pleasant to walk through here instead of having plants that are too tall for the space and then kind of caving in on you. I think with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up so that other people can talk. I want to stay on task here and on time. Personal experience is indispensable. Please get out, touch some plants, volunteer, work in your yard, try stuff out, make mistakes. It's the best way to learn. And a reminder to always have fun. Native gardening is fun. Please don't let the bunnies stress you out if they come and wipe out all your plants. I know they're like velociraptors from Jurassic Park, but don't let them stress you out. It can be fun. It's supposed to be fun. This is supposed to be an enjoyable thing for us to do. Things can be moved, things can be edited. So I hope you are walking away from this presentation at least, and just this overall panel, knowing that you can create a beautiful outdoor symphony that is attractive to you, works with our environment, and is very supportive of wildlife as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie Vandereet of St. Louis Native Plants. Thank you very much. As Gabe Presley, our next speaker, is getting his PowerPoint up here, I want to let you know that some of your questions are being answered in the chat. check, just kind of scroll up and down in the chat to see if they're being answered. I'm also keeping track of ones that I think make sense to ask all of our panelists. And yes, this recording will be shared after the event. It will be posted to the St. Louis County website as well as ultimately to the Partners for Native Landscaping website. Our next presenter is Gabe Presley. Gabe came to landscape architecture and native plants, especially with a fine arts background. He has been a landscape architect on the staff of DTLS since 2017. That is a firm that's located in South City, and he is an expert, perhaps one of the key people with native plants on the DTLS team. Some of the projects that he's worked on in high-profile public spaces have been on the WashU Medical Center campus, My Sister's Garden at Evelyn's House, the hospice facility of BJC, the Forest Park Center for Nursing and Health Sciences on the Forest Park campus, and the MSD headquarters downtown. So please welcome our next presenter, Gabe Presley from DTLS.
Thank you, Jean. I'm going to start with a meme, and this is kind of an icebreaker meme that I've had for a few presentations, and it just kind of explains the complexity of what it's like to be a landscape architect a little bit. And as you read through this, you know, I'm the guy on the bottom right there, right? You know, a lot of what we do is behind a computer screen. But as landscape architects, I think a few points I want to make about this as you look through this presentation is that, you know, we are licensed professionals that work in public space. And we work on all kinds of projects, like Jean mentioned just a second ago, from greenways to whole city plans to stormwater projects, residential projects, and all of them we think of as systems. And those landscape systems require collaboration with other professionals. And so we will work with architects and engineers, and in some cases, we're fortunate enough to work with horticulturists. And I'm always trying to strengthen my knowledge of native plants. It's something that I'm very passionate about. It's not, you know, planting design is something that I always feel very fortunate to be able to do, but it's not something that I do on all of my projects. And so as a result, I do some experimenting at home and as a volunteer. And so this presentation is a kind of just a photographic run through of two DTLS projects, the St. Louis Community College at Forest Park, the MSD headquarters, and then a few residential projects, mostly my own, and then some volunteer work that I've been doing at a local elementary school, all focused on native plants. And I've tried my best to just drop labels of each plant species on the photographs. And my hope is that while most of you may not be working on the scale of a landscape architecture project, one of the takeaways would be you know, plant combinations or scale or locations, that kind of thing. So just starting out with St. Louis Community College. For those of you that have been in St. Louis for a while, you may recognize the location and what it used to look like. But you know, the project's over on Oakland, near 40 across the highway from Forest Park between Kings Highway and Oakland. And the project was all about putting a new allied health building for nursing students on campus. And we made this new campus entry that goes right in front of the building. And balancing that entry is a very, very large rain garden. And at the time of planning for that rain garden, we were kind of reviewing how we were using native plants, what was working, what was not working. And you know, one of the things that we noticed a lot was that even though, you know, when we're documenting these things in a plan view and thinking about, you know, a square foot area for a certain species like this Asclepias, it left a lot of room below the plant because of the way the plant grows for kind of open mulch, right? So that open ground is what I would consider high maintenance. Even though the individual species is low maintenance, it's really evolved to grow into a grassy matrix, but that grassy matrix isn't there to help suppress weeds, right? And at that time, we were reading this wonderful book called Planting in a Post-Wild World by Thomas Rayner and Claudia West. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. But you know, this is not our idea here. We've kind of changed some of the terms a bit, but the idea is a layered landscape approach. So you have you know, structural plants as a term that they coined, but basically, you know, trees and shrubs, perennials that are really the backbone of the design. kind of a mid layer that's about blooming, and then a field or ground cover layer that's about weed suppression. And so we wanted to incorporate this design approach into this project. And we even documented our drawings this way, so that as the installation happened, they would install it in that order. So structural being, trees, shrubs, some big masses of perennials that really mattered as far as where they were proportionally. Dynamic kind of the next layer, and then field infilling. And just to call out one area as an example of what that kind of looks like in more detail. The inspiration was kind of like a Missouri roadside and some gardens that Scott has developed at Shaw Nature Reserve. And that structural layer is a nice clean frame. That's something that you'll hear from me a couple times during this presentation. So that's in the form of carex along the edge of the pavement. That's salt tolerant. That's something that we deal with a lot, is salt overspray. Some rudbeckia and some shrubs. And then the next layer for that seasonal bloom, milkweed, prairie dock, and Amsonia, and a coreopsis. And then infilling with a 50-50 mix of cool season and sedge and a warm season grass as a ground cover. And these are some photos of what that area looked like, probably about a year after it was installed. And really, the installation that first year surpassed our expectations. This is a lead campus, so there's no irrigation at all. So this bioretention area you can see on the left-hand side, this is right after installation, and a year later, with very little care, no extra watering, it had already started to fill in pretty nicely. This is a ground level view showing some of the species that we incorporated into the design. And I'm just calling out there on the left-hand side, that frame, that part of that structural layer, along with the trees and shrubs, is really important here. You've got this kind of diverse mix of plants in the background, but that edge is something that we wanted to keep pretty clean, and also to, again, help manage salt overspray. And also, I mentioned we were using a 50-50 mix of a cool season sedge and a warm season, grass. That's something that has worked out really well for us as far as just creating a really tightly knit ground cover. But I think one of the tangential benefits that I didn't really realize at the time, and I know this makes a lot of sense, I just hadn't really thought about it, was just that as summer moves to fall, those sedges are still remaining green most of the fall and winter, and you're getting all the warmer tones from the grasses, and it makes this wonderful high contrast landscape that you see on the right. We intermixed that with perennials. This is just a wonderful shot of what the campus has a blue sort of pattern, and so we try to incorporate as many blue or cool colored perennials possible. So that includes asters or blue mistflower. And it wasn't mixed everywhere. Some parts of the campus still had monocultures, and some of that was for aesthetic reasons related to like on the left-hand side there, some monumental sculptures that we had in place to sort of balance those out. Some was just a simple screening. But what I noticed through this project was that where there were weeds or unwanted species, they were more noticeable in a monoculture. So where you have that edge of Carex praegracillus, it's fulfilling that function to manage salt and to be a low growing plant, but it really showed weed species quite a bit. The next project is, and I gotta hurry up, MSD headquarters. So this one was all about showcasing what MSD does. So removing turf, having rain gardens, green roofs, permeable pavers, just managing stormwater, and inviting the public into this space in a safe and accessible manner. So this is a campus retrofit, and it started with the borders. And so that top right image shows you what the edge of the building used to look like, which was just a wall of burning bush. And so we replaced that with a very grassy matrix. And in some cases that includes shrubs like 9-bark. In other places it's sumac and pine. And this is actually a project that that I had the fortune to work on with Scott Woodbury. And here's an image of the before and after of the front door. Within that entry area, if you get a chance to go there, it's worth checking out. We were looking at how stormwater moves through the site. This diagram shows it a bit, but it starts with a green roof and a pavilion. flows down rain chains into troughs and swales. And the pavilion, we knew we couldn't get the public onto the green roof to see it, and so it does have a periscope so that you can look underneath it and see what's growing on top. One of the places I think that was really successful was this front rain garden with a really simple mix of just 3 species. So this is Joe Pyeweed, Juncus, which is common rush, and some iris, which looks really great pretty much all year. And we paid careful attention to seasonality. So, you know, we've got spring bloomers like the witch hazel there in the middle, or in the winter, some ilex for red berries, and even the spent, you know, flower blooms and the seeds of the yellowwood add some of that texture in the middle of the summer. So moving on to some residential projects. This one's in the works. Still on the landscape architecture scale of things, I think, but just wanted to share some awesome photographs of what it's looking like. This is a project in Ladue, and it's a dream project with a dream client. But one of the things that really popped last spring were the Pacra. And this project also has just a range of landscape types. So we have vernal pools that are kind of like small rain gardens for amphibians. We have privacy screens that are kind of glade inspired. So we've got juniper, sumac, and carex again, and even some additional green roofs with species that we're playing around with to see how they grow. This is on the DIY side of things, and this is my own city house when I lived in the St. Louis city. But I wanted to learn firsthand about what it was like to seed a landscape, and I didn't have a lot of room because I was living in a very small lot. But I just created a 3-foot wide strip and seeded it with a wildflower, native seed mix, and then documented the progress over time. We've since moved, and I have more space now, which just means obviously I have more room for a larger prairie. So, you know, I've done it again. And for us, it's a really helpful tool to learn what successful looks like, what to expect at different phases of growth over time, how to manage these landscapes. And so this is about a 3-year difference between those 2 photographs. And I love the seasonality of it. I love that I feel like if you showed me a photograph of a prairie, I could probably tell you what month it was taken in just by the composition of the seasons, the species that are blooming. But it's always changing. It's super dynamic. And the 2 things that are takeaways for me on this, one is access. You know, we cut walkways and pass through it, but just getting into it is a totally different experience. And so if you ever do this, I encourage it. Another one is edges. I think, you know, I could kind of see it, especially early on. I knew what I was doing as far as my kind of long-term vision, but it is a long-term vision. It takes time. And sometimes just having a mown turf edge around these types of landscapes to create a frame really helps. But you can also physically build one. So like in this case, we built like a 30-inch tall rail fence that helps to define it. You can't talk about prairies without talking about all the critters. So just a quick, I guess, montage of some of the visitors. And then lastly, school gardens. So this is just the elementary school where my children go. And so I've been helping with the design and maintenance of some gardens there. So this is a quick recap of one of the gardens. It's a signage kind of entry space. This is over what used to be a pavement. So it almost functions like a green roof, and it's never watered, it's never fertilized, and it has pretty much taken care of itself. Similar story here with this garden landscape. And I think the thing that I wanted to just touch on with these a little bit were some key species that have really just, I think, overperformed in ways that I didn't expect. One is foxglove beard tongue, which just has wonderful spring blooms, great fall color, just great structural interest. A world milkweed has been rambling underneath all those plantings the whole time. It has a wonderful texture to it. I have a misprint there, but aromatic aster has been beautiful, and it blooms really late, around October. And then Baptisia, both for the spring blooms and then the texture and sound later on. And one of the things that I have a lot of fun doing is growing native annuals. So if you do go to plant sales, like the Shaw sale, this is where I've gotten a lot of these, and I've carried them over the year and grown them, collected my own seeds, and I grow them every year. Just be on the lookout for these. The Helenium, the annual sneezeweed, and the Polynesia, the red whisker clammy weed, are two of the ones that I use a lot as a filler. They're just really easy to grow as a seed from seed, and then to place in your garden, and just kind of let them run a little bit. They're just quick to bloom. They fill in space really nicely, and easy to get your hands on. Hired a number of them, and here's just kind of a whole list of a few that I use pretty often. And that I went over a little bit. Sorry, Gene.
Well, we're going to take away your library card, Gabe. No, just
Yeah.
kidding. Thank you, Gabe Presley of DTLS. We're getting a lot of really, really good questions, and answering some of them in the Q&A, and are holding some for after we're finished. Okay, so our third presenter, and you're really getting to see such a wonderful diversity of kinds of projects, and then also the synergies between design principles. Scott Woodbury, who is the owner and principal of Cacalia Designs. Scott and I had the pleasure of being his colleague at the Missouri Botanical Garden and Shaw Nature Reserve for a hunk of both of our careers there. Right out of college, he was hired to be the curator of native plants for the fabulous Whitmire Wildflower Garden, which in my opinion is one of the best, if not the best, native plant gardens in the country, and served in that capacity for 30 years. And when Scott retired from that position, founded Cacalia Designs. And as you said to me, as I recall, Scott, in an interview, you were going to go off the rails a little bit, and you were going to meet people where they are and do a little bit of rewilding. So hit it, wild man. Scott Woodbury.
Okay, wild man, I'll try to meet that. Okay, so this is the right one. Sorry, this is taking a second. So we're thinking about this talk, and I decided to call it the control of nature by design. Controlling nature is something that happens in gardens. It's been happening for centuries. And there's a book that I've been looking at. It's an older book recently, and I've been thinking about why we garden. And it's a book called The Meaning of Gardens by Mark Francis and Randolph Hester. And in there, it's just a very simple statement. The garden has long served as a way of thinking about nature and about culture and about how each influences the other. Gardens do that. Over time, gardens have addressed culture, have addressed human need, and has also addressed nature, wildlife, and nature's need. And I think the two of them intersect in the garden more so in recent decades and century than in the past. He goes on to say it has been viewed as a balancing point between human control on the one hand. Obviously, Longwood Gardens in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania is one of the most controlled garden designs that you will ever see. Very pretty place to get married. It's all about pretty. It's all about visual interest for humans. And wild nature on the other. On the other hand, we have wilderness, we have wildness around us, and we have this place where humans perhaps aren't completely comfortable, maybe a place where humans aren't completely protected. At one time, we were chased by wild animals, we were stomped on by mastodons, and nowadays we are eaten alive by ticks and chiggers. My son was eaten alive by ticks and chiggers in this photograph. So somewhere in between is a comfortable place in the garden. This is a place where we have come from. This is a design that I did a while ago, and my designs oftentimes are much wilder than this. This is a place that is very contrived, full of plant material, full of diversity, very well manicured, very taken care of, lots of maintenance, lots of care. Is it still wild? Yes, to a certain degree. Much of the plant material is native. Some of it is not. There's a combination of native and non-native. And you're right, Jean, I am off the rails sometimes. I don't want to address the conventional garden style too much because I think that historically we have gone into it. There are magazines and books and whole courses and degrees that focus on conventional gardens, conventional design, plant material that's used in that setting. But what I really think we need assistance with in the world of design is how we address the natural style, because I think it's a newer thing. It's something that we haven't historically taught in school. We haven't really learned very well as a horticulture profession, landscape architecture, landscape design profession. We see these naturalistic designs. We see these gardens that look like this, but yet they're very different in terms of how they are planned. Gabe gave a really great description of how to plan and design one of these. But how to install them is another thing, and how to maintain them in the short term and the long term are also very different and very new. I'm not going to get into those details, but I'm going to give you some pointers on how you can get away with virtually murder. Now, this is not murder. This is beautiful. But how can you get away with this kind of garden style? Well, in this case, you can see that there is some little bit of structure, this snake rail fence at the edge, that gives it a little bit of a frame. It gives it a little bit of, this thing is intentional. It's not completely wild, and it is a little bit separated from where you're walking down the path. No offense. There are so many of these gardens around. I love seeing these gardens, but is this what we want to be presenting to the world? The world which comes from a very conventional place. Yes, in some neighborhoods, this is pulled off beautifully and accepted by people widely. But in some neighborhoods, it's not. And so here's some pointers. Here's some things that can help you. Having gardens that have some of the basic design elements that Susie mentioned: repetition of plant material, variation of height, and variation of texture. These are all great ways to create a garden that is accepted, that is loved in the community. Intensifying plants in masses and having great amounts of color, greater than you would in the wild, is another trick that gardeners, that landscape designers and architects use to make something that is relatively wild a little bit more beautiful and acceptable to the average person. Over at the Prairie Garden Trust, they have done this beautifully by massing wild hydrangea up close to the building. And then the further away you get from the building, the more chaotic and random all the plant material seems to be. And so this is a way of making a garden recognizable, making it welcoming to people who come to the visitor center when they first arrive. I recommend going there. It's a really cool place. And then, of course, another element that people have used historically is turf grass, and balancing turf with gardens. Is it's a familiar element. It's something that that we have in our landscape. Some of us have too much of it. Some of us have removed too much of it and have paid the price. And some of us have come to a place where there's a balance between turf and garden. Turf is a really important part, especially as you get wilder and wilder looking gardens. A park setting, a public park setting where seeded landscape is used, really benefits from having a little bit of mowed turf along the edge. Here's another one. This is a private garden, North St. Louis, up by the Missouri River. A garden that has a 10-foot buffer of mowed turf grass, and then relatively wild landscapes behind it. This is something that looks intentional. Again, it looks like it belongs. Elements of hardscaping can also really pull off a garden. Using stone, hardscaping, I'm not going to, is expensive. Hardscaping can be expensive, but hardscaping can be a way of creating something that that looks really meaningful, and it also can be very functional too. Removing an old concrete sidewalk and replacing it with flagstone that has gaps in between them, where you can put little tiny plants that grow in crevices, is something that I think can really make the difference in gardens. Creating walkways in places where you could never otherwise go, I think, is a magical way to get into nature. Now, obviously, this is a big, sprawling landscape with lots of acres, but we can create seating areas and places to sit and ponder and relax and take time in the garden to enjoy all of the wildlife that shows up. By placing benches, especially in places that are comfortable and meaningful to be. And lastly, having signage in some situations is important, and it is something that can make the difference in a garden setting, especially these gardens that are very wild and very naturalistic. People might not get it. Having something in there that says this is a native garden is really important in many cases. This is a really beautiful sign that I think says it all. Artwork is another thing that can make or break a garden, and so having flags or banners, having pottery, well-placed pottery can make a garden, can pull things off in a nice way. This is a very random garden with lots of different elements, but it has a little piece of sculpture. And as Jean says, since I am off the rails, I'm going to talk about native and non-native plants used together. Why not throw some zinnias in the mix? Why not throw tropical milkweed in the mix? There may be some reasons why not to use it, but a lot of these native annuals are really great for attracting pollinators. Lastly, I'll say that for those of you who listen through these 3 presentations and feel overwhelmed, there are some really great simple garden designs that are available at the Missouri Prairie Foundation, the Grow Native website, garden designs that have been created to make things easier. Getting down to the point where you are combining plants might be very intimidating. How do I choose the plants? Which plants go well together? Which plants are going to do the job that that Susie showed in that great slide in that narrow space between the house? So if you look at some of these designs that are on the website, this is kind of what that last design might look like. There's another one for a butterfly garden that has some short sections of split rail fence to grow vines on. This is a view of what this garden might look like. They've got some designs in there for formal shade gardening in front of the house. They have designs for a songbird garden. They have a design in there for a pond, a frog pond. And there's at least a half a dozen other designs in there. Those can be a great resource for you as you are just starting to step into the water of garden design, the waters of landscaping with native plants. We want to make it easy for you. Those are there for you for free. You can grab those, you can run with them, or you can have a conversation with Susie, Gabe, or myself. We would also be happy to talk to you about next steps in your gardening adventure. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott Woodbury. So again, we got to hear from 3 people who really are, sometimes I want to use the term masters, sometimes I want to use the term midwives of garden design and working with native plant communities, some expertise and absolutely a love of this stuff. Some questions that have been coming in the chat that I've been saving for you all. Let's see. Say a little bit more about bare ground. Susie, I think you were the one that referenced bare ground and what to do with it in the very beginning.
Yeah, so bare ground means first and foremost, not using weed fabric, which I did see that Jean actually posted that answer, I think, to somebody. The landscape fabric that honestly doesn't even really do much of what it's supposed to do anyway. It ends up collecting soil and weeds on top of it. And so that's not necessarily the best thing to use, but it does take away that interaction that the air has with the soil. It also makes it so that none of those bees or anything that wants to use that soil to nest can gain access to the soil. So having bare soil, having something that, even if you have mulch is okay. Bees and things like that will be able to find their way into mulch too. And there's a lot of ways that mulch can be good. But not using maybe more than 1 to 2 inches thick. Especially in areas that you're trying to, lend to supporting things that nest in the soil. The other thing is that if you're making more use of ground covers or living green mulch, that's going to be really helpful to reduce how much you're having to use actual mulch. The ground cover will do what mulch is supposed to do for us, which is basically to suppress weeds and also keep moisture in the ground and keep the ground from drying and cracking. And will help suppress some of the weed growth. And I think that answers another question actually that was in there about helping for weed control. If you are also, I also had mentioned planting groupings of plants that are contiguous, they're touching each other. And so instead of leaving these gaps, you still would have bare ground underneath, even taller plants, perennials that get kind of vase shaped and are like 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. You're still going to have bare ground underneath those, but they're going to be, as they grow against each other, shading out areas of the ground where you would otherwise have to suppress weeds some other way, shape, or form. So hopefully that answers that.
Thanks, Susie. And Gabe and Scott, I want to ask you, do you have recommendations, plants that are your favorites that function well as ground cover?
I guess it depends on the situation. I have, in my own personal experience, and professionally, we use Carex pergicillus a lot. It's a sedge. It is pretty aggressive, and it grows.
Carex, I'm sorry, that was Carex. It was one of the sedges. What was the name of it?
Pergicillus, tollway sedge.
Always.
That's one you saw in my presentation quite a bit, and I've used it at that school as well. It's just tough. It grows really quickly. A lot of plants that are aggressive and grow quickly, that's a bonus, and it's also a concern because it can also run amok, or it can grow really quickly and it can kind of fade away. Another one that's for full sun, kind of like tough, dry, potentially salty areas. One that I've had that's also pretty quickly spreading, but has stayed really low, and I've had other perennials grow out of it, is wild strawberry. And it has really great fall color as well. So those are two that I'll put a plug in for.
Scott?
Yeah, so a couple things that that I like to use, and one thing is a plug for a plant called prairie groundsel, Pachyra platensis, which is not available as much as the other species of Pachyra or Senecio, but it's a sun-loving plant, and I like to mix it with aggressive sedges like, Pennsylvania sedge is sort of moderately aggressive, but I like to mix it with these suckering sedges as a way of creating a ground cover that's a little bit more interesting, a little bit more dynamic and diverse. And both of those are pretty aggressive, and so there's not a whole lot that you can grow with it. They fill in space very thoroughly, and they hold their ground really well. So we're talking ground covers. We're not talking about using them as a species in a perennial garden.
Buckram sedges. That's what was Sylvester the cat. I also really like in the shade, Asarum canadense, wild ginger is one of my favorite plants once you can get that established. And sometimes you can get a really nice coverage of prairie pussy toes going in a semi-shady area. If the plant likes it, it's going to spread around. And if it doesn't like it, try something else. Also want to ask you all about screening plants. There were several questions about screens to replace invasive bush honeysuckle, and one specific question about what might complement Eastern red cedar seedlings that the person is just ordering from the conservation department. Screens.
If I could just jump right in and say that one of my favorite screens is bladder pod, or it's called bladder nut, Staphylia trifoliata. It's a shade-loving species that uh, I like it because it does sucker a little bit. It's not highly aggressive, but it'll make a thicket. It's great to replace honeysuckle in shady environments. And one of the biggest hangups that people have who live along a roadside, if they've got honeysuckle between their road and their house, they don't want to give up the honeysuckle. But with a plant like bladdernut, you can replace honeysuckle and have something come up pretty quickly, pretty densely, and create a screen that flowers beautifully, has delicate fragrance, and then it has these fun little pods at the end of the season that you can pop like a little balloon.
I'm gonna look that up. Susie, Gabe, any screen recommendations there?
For honeysuckle substitutes specifically, I really love elderberry. Elderberry grows really fast and has a very similar sort of multi-stemmed growth. But I also kind of like a layering approach because we don't necessarily have, I mean, I know Eastern red cedar is the evergreen in the mix there. But if you need something more lower level, I think taking advantage of some of our shade tolerant grasses, like anything that's in the Elemis genus. So like our rye grasses, bottle brush, Virginia rye, things like that that have a little more height to them and you could leave standing through the winter time are also going to add another layer of screen that would stay throughout and be persistent through the winter time, even though it's not necessarily evergreen. So.
Yeah, I'll
Gabe?
piggyback on that and just add just looking at nature for inspiration. We all probably spend too much time driving around in our cars, and when you're looking at the side of the highway, it's something that's familiar to all of us. You see a lot of cedar trees growing, and they grow with sumac. That's a really great one to pair with it, and also a lot of tall grasses. So sumac, as in like staghorn or smooth sumac, and then a tall grass like a switchgrass, or like Susie was saying, something in the Elemis family, something like that.
I have hedges of fragrant sumac, which is a smaller sumac, in two corners of my city yard. And I started those with bare root seedlings from the conservation department and then augmented them with bigger plants. And they are two really nice corner hedges after several growing seasons. Let's see. There were several questions about seeds. I know seeding is tricky. Is there a best time to grow native seeds, or what would you like to say about native plants from seeds in general?
I'll just jump right in there and say that I saw Gabe's seeded prairie in his front yard in the early phases. And I always experienced the same thing that he did. And that is that when you plant something from seed, usually it's done in the fall, early winter. And so don't think that you can really get started in the spring with a seeded project, although you can get away with doing grasses. But when you do a seeded project, and you need to think of it a little bit differently. People get into trouble when they think that a seeded landscape is something that can be done in a season. And it's really a 3 to 5 year process to go from turf grass or whatever you're starting with to the final end result. So patience is required. The first year it's going to be weedy. The second year is going to be weedy with some plants mixed in. And the third year it's going to start to have plants that bloom and fruit and start to look like a landscape. There's a lot of maintenance involved in that first 3 year establishment phase. And there are a lot of resources to help you figure out what that maintenance is. If you don't do good site prep in the beginning, you're going to fail. If you don't do good maintenance in the middle, you're going to fail. It's a different process. It's very different than conventional landscaping.
Yeah, I will echo all of that and say to trust the process, to educate yourself on what all those steps are, trust the process, because it's not going to look like success, like Scott was saying. I really thought mine was a failure, and maybe in some ways it is. I think overall it's worked out. But at the end of the first growing season, it looked like nothing. It looked like crabgrass. And it's been pretty amazing to see how it has just sort of subtly changed and transformed year after year.
Okay, one last really quick question. Soil. Revitalizing soil. Do you need to add anything from soil? Linda asked a couple of times, does she need to add mycorrhizae to native plantings? Say a little bit about that relationship, that initial relationship between natives and soil, and we'll wrap up there at ground level.
I will say that I have a little less experience with mycorrhizae. I know that we use them pretty extensively when I worked at Forest Park with our tree plantings. That's the most experience that I've had with it, I would say. I know that, pretty sure that Scott had a pretty, I'll let him speak to that about the prairie plantings at Shaw and things like that. But the prepping soil otherwise, I mean, I think that there is a concern that the soil needs some sort of nourishment of some kind, like either you need to bring in another like layer of topsoil or leaf compost or something like that, especially in a situation where you're dealing with something that's like sitting in new construction, where maybe the whole top layer of good soil has been taken out, and you're left with something that's a little less nutrient heavy down below. Then I think you maybe need to do something a little more extensive of adding topsoil and then also maybe some leaf compost, things like that. But usually for most of my plantings in residential areas that do not fall into that category, a layer of leaf mulch and compost, that's really the most that I would advise.
Yeah, just a shout out to a product that I like to use when I'm planting in crummy conditions. Biotone has mycorrhizae. It has other slow release fertilizers, natural fertilizers in it. Mycorrhizae are important. You can buy them in garden centers nowadays in small packets. And I like to incorporate it. The powdered forms are great because you can mix it in a watering can and water plants in as you're planting them. That introduces mycorrhizae into the root zone, and fingers crossed they get established in there, and they will make your mostly your perennials pick up steam and maintain themselves over time.
Gabe, you get the last word.
I think that was great advice.
Okay, there was a question about deer. I did answer that question in the chat. Deer will basically eat anything except they don't generally eat bush honeysuckle. So visit grownative.org for planting plans, plant lists, top 10 lists, including the plants that deer like the least. And try those plants, adapt them to your site. And Grow Native, I can't say enough good things about it. It is a motherlode of good resources, wonderful information. In my opinion, the best native plant program in the US. And we have it right here in Missouri, came from our tax-funded Missouri Department of Conservation, now managed by the wonderful Missouri Prairie Foundation. Grownative.org. My favorite thing about it is it is an imperative. It has an exclamation point. Grow Native. Doesn't dink around. Thank you, Susie Vandereet. Thank you, Gabe Presley. Thank you, Scott Woodbury. And thank you, Rebecca Clark and St. Louis County Library.
Absolutely. Many, many thanks to you all, and especially to Eugene. We so appreciate it. Everyone in attendance, stay tuned for a link in your email for the recording that will be added to YouTube. You can also check out the library's YouTube page at any time for all of the past recordings of virtual programs. And also stay tuned for more programs within the Partners for Native Landscaping series. Jean, I think the next one is March 19th, and it's presented by you.
Oh, good. Monarchs and mosquitoes. Also, there are some questions that we didn't get to. The Missouri Botanical Garden has a green resources information service. You can email us at greenresources@mobot, MOBOT.org. Greenresources@mobot.org. Those questions actually come to me. I'm the Garden's Green Resources Answer Girl. And if anybody ever writes to plant information and asks about rose gardening, I always tell them about the native plants before I pass them on to the general specialists, because I feel it's good to proselytize. So send those questions our way and we'll do our best to cover them. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you all. Bye, all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.